Bless. Heavenly Army of AHAYAH briefing. Tactical analysis of enemy psychological warfare via satanic multimedia and technological distraction systems. Attention warriors of the Heavenly Army of AHAYAH. This tactical directive details the adversary's deployment of electronic warfare, audiovisual psychological operations, and neurochemical conditioning mechanisms designed to disarm, distract, and spiritually neutralize the anointed ones in these final days. The adversary, fully aware that his time is short and his ultimate condemnation is finalized, has escalated his covert and overt campaign against human consciousness. His objective is the systematic rerouting of human focus, desire, and cognitive processing away from AHAYAH and our sovereign master YASHAYA, steering unsuspecting souls towards spiritual destruction. Understanding these mechanisms is an operational necessity for every warrior under the command of Yah. The enemy's assault operates through three primary technical vectors: visual media, audio media, and integrated audio-visual systems. Visual weaponization includes high-frequency imagery, digital interfaces, infinite scroll architecture, and curated imagery engineered to capture the optic nerve and flood the mind with worldly desire, vanity, and moral rot. Audio weaponization leverages subliminal frequencies, corrupt lyrical content, disharmonious soundscapes, and hypnotic acoustic engineering designed to penetrate the subconscious, altering spiritual alertness and inducing apathy toward the word of Yah. Audio-visual weaponization represents the culmination of this electronic offensive, combining immersive narrative structures, high-intensity visual cuts, and specialized acoustic scoring to bypass logical filters and directly access the emotional and spiritual core of the human target. At the center of this technological offensive is the deliberate exploitation of biological reward pathways, specifically the mechanical manipulation of dopamine response systems. Satan's technological apparatus converts modern devices into digital dopamine dispensers, engineering calculated feedback loops to trigger neurochemical spikes upon interaction. Each notification, autoplayed sequence, short-form video, and digital validation metric functions as an artificial stimulus, conditioning the human mind to seek continuous high-frequency stimulation from worldly sources. This continuous neurological overload creates biological desensitization. Rendering the quiet, disciplined, and profound spiritual practices of meditating on the precepts of AHAYAH appear understimulating to a compromised mind. This neural conditioning directly drives the tactical trap of binge watching and binge listening. By engineering content platforms to remove natural stopping points, employing autoplay mechanisms, cliffhangers, and algorithmic personalization, the enemy induces state-level cognitive fatigue and spiritual paralysis. Hours of continuous consumption overload and executive functioning of the brain, creating an unalert, passive mental state like a zombie, where critical spiritual discernment is suspended. That's a zombie. During these prolonged periods of passive consumption, subtle worldly doctrines, anti-biblical moralities, and anti-biblical moralities and covert spiritual subversion are absorbed without resistance, hardwiring the neural pathways of the individual to align with the values of the world rather than the holiness required by AHAYAH. The ultimate objective of this neurological and psychological re-engineering is the total displacement of Yah-centered or God-centered or spiritual-centered contemplation. The human mind is a battlefield, and the adversary seeks to occupy its entire bandwidth so that no operational space remains for praying, contemplating the scriptures, or standing in spiritual readiness. You have to always be ready. When the mind is continually saturated with worldly stimuli, its capacity for deep reflection on the divine truth of Yashaya is systematically degraded. The mind becomes hardened to the voice of the spirit. Fixation on transient earthly matters. The mind becomes hardened to the voice of the spirit, fixated on transient earthly matters, and functionally disarmed against spiritual ambush. The scriptures explicitly command absolute vigilance and defensive discipline over the mental gates. In Proverbs 4:23, it is written, "Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life." Every image, sound, and narrative allowed through the eye and ear gates directly impacts the state of the heart, forming the spiritual foundation from which all conduct flows. Furthermore, Romans 12:2 provides strict defensive protocol against the psychological conditioning of this age, declaring, "And do not be conformed to this world any longer with its superficial values and customs, but be transformed and progressively changed as you mature spiritually by the renewing of your mind, focusing on godly values and ethical attitudes so that you may prove for yourselves what the will of AHAYAH is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." Renewal of the mind requires the active tactical rejection of worldly technological conditioning. Renewal of the mind requires the active tactical rejection of worldly technological conditioning. Renewal of the mind requires the active tactical rejection of worldly technological conditioning. In 2 Corinthians 10:4-5, the offensive doctrine of our warfare is clearly established. For the weapons of our warfare are not physical weapons of flesh and blood, but they are mighty before AHAYAH for the overthrow and destruction of strongholds. We are destroying sophisticated arguments and every exalted and proud thing that sets itself up against the true knowledge of AHAYAH. And we are taking every thought and purpose captive to the obedience of Mashiach. Digital strongholds, algorithmic dependencies, and media-induced mindsets must be aggressively dismantled using divinely empowered discipline, bringing every thought into absolute alignment with Sovereign Master Yashaya. Finally, the urgency of our operational readiness is heightened by the late hour of the prophetic timeline. 1 Peter 5:8 issues an uncompromising warning to all warriors of the assembly of Yah. Be sober, well-balanced, and self-disciplined. Be alert and cautious at all times. That enemy of yours, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, fiercely hungry, seeking someone to devour. Sobriety of mind is impossible when submerged in continuous digital intoxication. Sobriety of mind is impossible when submerged in continuous digital intoxication. The heavenly army of AHAYAH must execute immediate countermeasures. Restrict unmonitored media consumption. Break dopamine dependencies through intentional digital fasting from nefarious media distractions and digital detachment. Guard the eye and ear gates with uncompromising rigor and reestablish continuous meditation upon the unadulterated truth of AHAYAH and Yashaya. Stand firm, guard your mind, and maintain absolute operational readiness at all times. Bless.